Welcome to our weekly lecture program, gathering every Friday at 7 p.m. In a new space called Apollo Cinema. It's the only, if I'm not mistaken, the only Art Nouveau cinema building in the South Caucasus. The history is quite interesting. Please Google it. You're going to enjoy the history of this building. Hopefully it's going to be renovated at some point and restored. Tonight we are having a very interesting speaker, Olga Sezneva, who is an urban sociologist with a quite valuable and diverse both personal and professional multi-layered experience that she's going to present herself, I guess. And the topic is, as we see here, common places and common memories, point of view of an urban sociologist. And we're gonna talk and think of how architecture and urban planning can be an approach to reevaluate our collective memory. So I think it's time to give the floor to Olga.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Paulina, for your introduction. I will say a few more words about myself, but can you hear me without the technology?
Yeah, but microphone doesn't work.
That's what I suspected. And if you cannot hear me, then you just raise your hand and let me know, okay? This is a very, very special invitation for me. This is a very special moment. I want to repeat myself. I've been here in Georgia for now 6 days, already invited by a citizen art lab from Berlin. And I'm here really to learn and to help as much as I can. This place, when I got the announcement and when the organizers asked me to be at the Apollo Theater, Apollo Cinema, I immediately had connection in my mind, because Apollo Theater for me is a very special place in Manhattan, in Harlem. Apollo Theater was an iconic place during the African-American Black culture renaissance in the 1920s, 1930s. I happened to live in New York, not at that time. I'm not that ancient. And coming here and seeing this name of this building immediately brought me back to my years of living in New York. It immediately triggered memories, and very special and very rich memories. And let me say, there is no building in the city which is just a building, right? Every corner, every stone, every structure can be imbued with history, can be imbued with memory. And that's what I would like to talk to you about tonight. Now, introducing me, Paulina already mentioned something about my layered background. I am what I call an academic nomad and a serial migrant. I changed 3 countries, 6 cities, and I embrace the moment of not belonging to any particular nation, to any particular power structure, but actually using my space, my position in between, my position of a stranger, my position of someone who doesn't quite belong, to provide reflections about the place in which I am at a given moment. I did my doctoral in New York, at New York University. After that, I joined the University of Chicago as a collegiate assistant professor, And from there, I was hired by the University of Amsterdam. They made an offer I couldn't turn down, and I relocated to Europe. And currently, I am teaching urban sociology, urban studies, focusing a lot of my work on revising pedagogies at my university. So one of my contributions that is very important to me, or I consider very important, is in decolonizing the syllabus in sociology. Do we have social scientists in the audience? I know that many of you guys are students coming here. I feel like very much at home with you. No sociologists? Urbanism. Okay, great. Urbanism, familiar. History, historians. Okay. Literature folks? Complete? English? Okay. All right. So decolonizing syllabus is one thing I am very passionate about. So passionate that the dean of my faculty decided to appoint me a diversity officer and start developing or bringing a change in hiring, retention practices, recruitment at the university, and launching various programs that help students from global north, from global south and former Dutch colonies, but also French colonies and now German colonies, to find their voice, to find their place, and become strong members of the Students' Council at my university. So this is my background. Again, I'm speaking from between the cracks, interstitial spaces, so to speak, and that's what I believe gives me a perspective that I dare to share. My talk is titled Common Places, Uncommon Memories, and I want to start with maybe for some of you a very well familiar statement, a truism, that no memory is simply personal. Right? We think that memory is the most intimate thing that belongs to us individually. In fact, and it's been, this thinking has been going on for nearly a century now, all memories are collective, or they require social frameworks. And these frameworks can be about how we preserve our individual memories, archives, literature, the arts, writing them down, photographing. But what's more interesting to me is how actually what we think is as remembered by us is actually quite necessarily influenced by the community in which we live, by our family, by our peers, and the nation. Since the mid-19th century, the nation has provided one of the strongest collective frameworks which shape our individual memories, validate them, give them meaning, and make them simply believable. Right? And I'm sure that this is something that you all can relate to. Now, where does this leave the city? Because, you know, as I said, I'm an urbanist. So the city actually is one of these shared frameworks. It's a space that by material, physical means provides us with instruments of sharing our individual memories and constructing collective narratives. One of the most famous living scholars, writers about urbanism, Richard Sennett, a familiar name? No. Take notice, really cool author, very interesting stuff. He launched this notion that when we are in space, whether we know it or not, we actually relate to another human being. So physical co-presence, or our sort of relationship with rooms, lobbies, stairs, streets, is also simultaneously a way of relating to others. Again, even though they seem to be like just dead stones. How does this actually happen? My apologies for the quality of the image. This is the best we could do. I want to start with a story that happened in Richmond, Virginia in 2017. The statue of Confederate General Robert Lee was to be removed from its prominent public place. But the protests against the removal, led by white supremacists, resulted in the death of a young woman, Heather Heyer, who happened to stand on the way of the mob that washed the Central Street of Charlottesville. So the fame or infamous reputation of General Lee now was overridden by a contemporary death of a young protester. This is a removal of this unfortunate statue that eventually happened in 2021. But Charlottesville and General Lee was not the only historical character who provoked a rage. Similar things started happening also in New York. The statue of Columbus, Christopher Columbus, came under a similar attack and requested to be removed. And in a similar way, a medical doctor, a gynecologist, J. Marion Sims, whose statue was standing in front of the Museum of Natural History, also came under attack when it became publicly known that she performed medical experiments on black women in the American South without their consent and their knowledge. So both of these statues, both of these figures were removed. The US and the UK, as you, I'm sure, well know, experienced this massive wave of public statue removals. And it, of course, was closely related to the new understanding, the critical reflection of the colonial history of both the US and the UK. But 10 years before, a similar conflict that also resulted in death took place in Tallinn, in Estonia, in the former Soviet space, when a statue to the fallen soldier, that's what the memorial was called, was slated for removal from its central place in the city. So with the decomposition of the communist bloc and Estonia choosing the route of membership to the European Union and the NATO, the Soviet nation, its army, and the memorial dedicated to them all merged in one symbol, the symbol of a communist oppression. And the former liberator turned into an occupant and an oppressor, And in this newly emerged perspective, the statue was removed and placed in the outskirts of the city. Now, what's interesting here is that the bronze soldier or the fallen soldier, the monument, was removed from the center, which was considered the highest symbolic place. But unlike the statue of General Robert Lee in Jacksonville, it was not destroyed, but rather placed in a different place in the city, in the periphery, right? So the space of the city is loaded with symbolic importance to varying degree. And you might ask, why did Estonians kept the memorial, right? Why they did not destroy it just the way New Yorkers or Floridians or Virginians did? Any guess?
The Russian population, 1/3 of the country.
The Russian population, exactly. There was a massive opposition on the part of the ethnic Russian population in Estonia, and the compromise had to be reached with the statue to be preserved and removed from the central symbolic place to the periphery. So the context matters, the social network matters, the force and the capability of social movement that forms in the city, that forms in the place, matter hugely when we think, when we live with statues, with memorials. And memorials like this, of course, are the primary and the most direct means of creating and establishing historical memory and collective memory, and eventually identity. Now, let me move for now away from sculptures and memorials to something quite different. There is a line of defense erected by Nazi Germany right at the outbreak of World War II that stretches all the way from Scandinavia along the Atlantic coast of France. And this line consists primarily of bunkers. Right? This is actually what's interesting. This is when and where this cement or beton was widely used and perfected as a material in construction. And I want to focus on a particular part of the Atlantic line, small communities in Normandy, Urville, Azerville, and Beeville. For a very long time, these places consisted of these gigantic, bulky, brutal structures, bunkers, right? It's a defense line. And the defense line started falling apart, started crumbling, until a group of artists, independent of one another, discovered some brutalist beauty, both in the shape, in the form, and in the material. And they worked with this material very much following the writing of a French postmodernist writer, Paul Virilio, who wrote a text, Bunker Archaeology. Right? If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's a commentary on a modernist, culture modernist moment and the death of modernity. So the bunker archaeology of Virilio inspired artists from all over Europe, extending to the US, to engage with these remnants, leftovers of the war of Nazi defense line of World War II. And they did it in a variety of different ways. And here I give you two examples. So in the upper right-hand side, it's a work by a Polish artist, Magdalena Jetylowa. And this series of installations was produced in 1995. And what she did, she projected quotes from Paul Virilius texts onto the walls of these ruined bunkers and documented projections. She let them run for hours and days at a time, and visitors could engage with these ruins in a different way. And in the bottom right-hand side, you see the work of Jane and Louise Wilson. It's called Kazimate SK667. The work was produced in 2006. What they did was a series of black and white photographs overblown like gigantic size, and installed and shown in various museums, including Tate Modern. So what I like about the seawall, the Atlantic wall, is how the aesthetic or artistic aesthetic means bring new meaning out, right? Something that literally had fallen into disrepair and forgotten has been brought back to life, but with a new undertone, right? With a new emphasis, with a new idea. So ruins left by terrible events should not disappear. They also have the power to fix and arrest those terrible events, while at the same time reframing them, giving them or putting them in new representational fields. Okay, so this was an example of working with ruins and using artistic practices for commemoration and creating new meaning and new memories. And this is something that comes from Singapore. I actually really like this story. I was there myself 4 years ago, and I was introduced to the Hungry Ghost Festival, the Hungry Ghost Festival. It's an event that happens in Singapore city over like 3 days, usually in February, and it's initiated, supported by the Chinese community of the city. And that's also the way in which this community is fighting gentrification. There's been massive urban renewal going on, and there's been massive loss of kind of identities and memories associated with the Chinese people in Singapore. And what happens here is paper money, paper houses, even BMW cars are brought together on certain night and burned on sidewalk curbs, street corners, parking garages, food courts, and other urban areas to pacify the ghosts that populate the city. Right? And those ghosts can be the dead, who kind of in Buddhist community, unlike the Jewish Christian, they are not necessarily evil. They can do evil, and thus kind of pleasing them with all sorts of food offerings, but they are not necessarily such. And so for 3 nights of this festival, a very different geography of the city of Singapore appears. The geography made by toy BMWs or by burning fires elsewhere. And this is a kind of a different topography. It's very momentous. It comes and goes. It doesn't stay. It's not made of stone. But it transforms the city every year, so it's kind of cyclical. It has its own temporality. And it creates or visibilizes a very different urban space. So compared to statues or compared to glorified ruins, these events in the city are immaterial, they are fleeting, they are more about experiences and memories attached to experiences rather than stable places. And this reminds me of yet another moment of memory creation and preservation of the past. This is an example from initially Berlin, but now it's been happening in all European cities that lost their Jewish communities. It started in Berlin by Berlin-born artist Günther Demnig, who created Stolperstein, right? The stepping stones. And these stones, these are kind of plaques made of copper with the names of residents of the city, residents of specific neighborhood and building that were taken to concentration camps during the period of National Socialism. Roma, homosexual people, and the disabled are included in this commemorative practice. So what's interesting here is that unlike the statue, these stones are made in the shape and the size of a regular road pavement, right, a cobblestone. And we can actually walk over them. Again, not something that we usually associate with veneration, with glorification, with preservation of memory, right? The feet can actually walk over the stones. They are elevated a bit, so they stick out, and they sometimes you can slip over it, you can stumble over it. They interrupt your regular normal movement. They create discomfort on a perfectly comfortable street of a European city. So what the stones do is they make our body act differently. And that's their role, that's their function. They don't affect us through our eyes, a perspective that opens up. They don't trigger any cognitive mechanisms. They really are about embodied moment. And Günther Demnig, who came up with this idea, he was inspired by Jewish Passover Haggadah, during which every generation should consider themselves as if they themselves were rescued from Egypt, right? So as a historical event, the exodus from Egypt is not quite, it's not that important to the practitioners of Haggadah. The Haggadah asks the believers not to remember, but to live through the moment, to put it through their body, to reenact it. And so part of daily practice in Berlin, walking on these tumbling stones, have a similar logic. They disrupt, as I already said, a flow of a normal routine, bringing consciousness back to the body and then back to history. And at this banal moment of you tripping over a stone, you can make a choice. You can get upset and curse, or you can look down, get down, read, and become aware. The choice is yours. The choice is of the pedestrian. So, the point I was making so far is that no piece of marble, of wrought iron, contains history in itself. The memorials that steer the culture, the memorials that steer the culture was, that I described in the beginning, either the Estonian monument to the soldier or the American Confederate memorials. Most of their lives, these memorials stood as mere decorative additions to townscapes, hardly noticed by anyone but birds. Right? We know that birds really like nesting and sitting on heads of statues. So for a memorial to have a mnemonic power, it needs to be inserted in the web of relationships, contemporary political processes, and of other existing cultural symbols. But they also need to find those who speak on their behalf. They really need voices that channel their narratives, that frame their stories, that make them visible. And we need to engage with complex questions of selective memory, the moral attitudes that are implicit in writing of any kind of history, and the way in which our understanding of the past impacts our present. And this is the moment at which I'm going to leave this global, international, rather abstracted context of storytelling and go to something that I experienced myself in my research. Because past 2 decades I've been working in the city of Kaliningrad. How many of you know this place or heard of this place? Do you know? Wow, that's impressive. On the other side of the Atlantic, nobody would tell me what it is. What happened there? What do I need to do? Unplug and plug again? No. Okay.
No?
All right.
But, yeah, this is video, yeah?
No, it's not the video, but it's for some reason it doesn't read.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Huh. Let me go here first. Yes. This is a picture that gives you a sense of where the place is, but also what happened to this place. A massive destruction of the city. What was once East Prussia was transferred to, was actually divided between Poland, Lithuania, and the Soviet Union, and what today is the Kaliningrad region has been had become part of the Russian Federation, with remarkable consequences for today. I will get to the point of today a bit later, maybe in our Q&A session. What I want to focus on now, since we're talking about cities and memory, is this fact. So the city was occupied. In the course of 4 years, all of its ethnic German residents were deported, and it was repopulated in its entirety with Russian speakers brought from different parts of the Soviet Union, primarily from the areas most affected by the war. And all the toponyms of the city, of the province, had also changed, and they assumed a very ordinary, non-descriptive names, like Kaliningrad, like Sovetsk, like Znamensk, like Svetlogorsk, which used to be Russian, or Kranz, or Königsberg. In the course of this transfer, guys, I'm sorry. This is messing up my storytelling. In the course of this transfer, a massive amount of German properties were seized by Americans, by Brits, but of course, and this is where things are important to us since we're talking about East Prussia, by the Soviet Union. Just to give you a sense or a scale of how much wealth was requisitioned, that was the name, that was the word given to the process of dispossession that occurred at that time. So the requisition entailed 1,280,000 tons of various goods, 3,600,000 tons of industrial equipment. And we are talking about everything from copper cable to the machinery. Of 17,000 mid-size and large factories identified by Soviet auditors, nearly 4,500 were seized and expropriated in 1 year, in 1945, and 200 more added to the list in 1946. And this kind of requisitioning continued uninterrupted up until 1950. So we are really talking about massive emptying out of vast territories. The agreement was made that the Soviet Union would requisition from the eastern part of Germany, which was coming under the Soviet control later on, and western part was left to the US. And to execute this requisitioning, to execute this dismantling of factories, of fields, of businesses, they were created special brigades. They were called the Trophy Brigades. And I want you to pay attention to the word trophy, because no word is just a word. It's very important how it shapes our memory. So Trophy Brigades were created, and they were more or less institutionalized way of stripping cities, countryside of their wealth. But in parallel, of course, individuals were difficult to control. They ran wild, looting and plundering civilians, and there was no civilian opposition to this process whatsoever. There was an understanding that as the war was coming to an end, and as the Soviet government exhausted its reserves to pay its soldiers, looting and plundering became a way to pay to their officers and to their soldiers. In December 1944, there was a special decree, a law, that permitted a soldier to ship out of Poland or Ukraine or later Germany, Czechoslovakia, Romania, up to 5 kilos of goods, requisitioned goods, for free. The officers could ship 10 kilos per month, and the upper echelon, upper commanders could ship 25 kilos every month. No questions asked as to where these goods came from. In the course of me researching this issue, which was not very difficult, well, it was very difficult to research in the sense that there is very limited amount of stuff preserved, archival materials, and there is limited number of sources about what exactly happened, where things were commissioned from, requisitioned from, in what kind of order. So it was difficult to research, but oral histories, collective memory actually preserved a lot of stories about trophies in contemporary Russian society. Lots of families told me that they still have trophy tables. They call them trophyne. They still have trophy china or porcelain sets that they call them trophyne service. They still have trophy tablecloths, trophy dresses. They kept these objects, they kept these things as something to be proud of. And so what I'm currently doing is I'm documenting oral accounts. I'm writing down what till now exists as oral history of these requisitioned objects. And I'm looking at the ways in which they are cleansed. They transform from trophy into patrimony, how they become heritage. What kind of removal of violence is necessary for something that was looted to become a patrimony, to become a family loom, an heirloom? Just to hint you how this happens, one means is linguistic. You name or rename something наследие or heritage, and the trophy and its meaning disappears. And the second, you put things on the market. Market exchanges. Marketplaces are excellent urban spaces in which rewriting of provenance of a thing, forgetting its origins, can be done and can be possible. And so as long as we continue doing this whitening out by whatever means we have at the disposal, no memory of violence can be preserved. Tracing the ways in which widening of objects and rewriting their history happens, I see as a chance for us to become aware and reflective of all the violence that goes into making the heritage, be it in Jacksonville, be it in Bristol, be it in Paris, be it Kaliningrad. Thank you, guys. I'm going to stop here. I hope I triggered some thoughts in your mind, and now I'm here to answer your questions or simply to have a conversation, because I'm sure that you can say many more things and add a lot to what I already spoke about. Thanks.
Thank you very much. All right, now we have
You
some
have to
time
speak
for
up, Pauline.
for okay for Q&A. So feel free to ask questions, and while you're thinking of your first question, maybe multiple questions, I would remind you that our project is supporting the evacuation project for Ukraine called Helping to Leave. It's a 24/7 evacuation project that deals with the evacuation process from Ukraine to the EU and from Russia back to the EU. Plus, we are providing financial support for those people who stay in Ukraine right now. So feel free to leave your donations around the corner. We very much appreciate it. Help is very much needed. So who would be the first, maybe?
And feel free to just free associate. If you have a memory you would like to share, or if you know of a place in the city that you want to tell us about.
Yeah, it would be great to hear about your personal experience with probably revelating.
Do you hear me without the technology? No?
We are doing the recording.
Okay. So I just wanted to talk about how people can change the memories they relate to in the city by putting some graffiti or whatever. In Tbilisi, it's very well, spread, and it brings very different memories to different people. And now, especially now, we can see many, politically provided, writings about whatever, Ukraine, Russia, Putin, blah, 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 which transforms your everyday memories about different places. So, I don't know. That's not really a question, but that's my individual, experience.
Great. I'm really glad that you brought up graffiti and street art. I need to speak on this? Yeah, okay. So there was a group in Chicago, kind of artists, architects, and researchers. So when the wave of removing memorials started, they actually said, guys, let's maybe not remove, but open them up to all kinds of vandalization. And let's turn them into these spaces where you can basically do whatever and make it into a collective process of healing. If you want to break the nose off, go for it. If you want to spray paint it, go for it. And the product itself will also be an evidence of the collective emotion that the memorial, that the sculpture provokes. So I do think that, yes, working with vandalization can be very, very productive and not destructive, or not only destructive.
Someone else? Yeah, okay. I can do it.
Sorry, I laugh when I'm nervous. So when you were talking, such an interesting lecture, thank you so much.
Welcome.
So when you were talking, I was thinking about a building in my hometown. I'm from Ireland, and there's a building in my hometown that was half burnt down when the British came and invaded. And I was thinking, and they left it like half burnt down. And so every day of my life I've passed this building that's been burnt down and is like kind of like a symbol of our colonial past. But I never thought about it until you started talking about Kaliningrad. And I was just kind of really struck by that. I was thinking, wow, it was kind of a big moment for me. But also, how common is that, like, for people to be walking by something that's so symbolic and just never want to think about it?
Yes. No, well, thank you very much for bringing this up and sharing this experience with us. Actually, that's exactly why I'm against urban renewal. Why I think that cleaning spaces, or so-called cleaning spaces, is also destruction of memory. It's also destruction of these moments, the physical moments of discomfort in the city that kind of force us to pause, force us to think, force us to say, wow, you know, this is colonial moment right before my eyes. Luckily, we have all kinds of ICT, you know, we can use virtual realities, FATs, etc., so we can actually create doubles of places that we lose to capital development and big corporations that want to sanitize urban areas, right? We can document how they were, what they were, and create virtual realities on the basis of this documentation, of these archives, and overlay physical space with digital space, and kind of play with contradictions that the today and yesterday creates. Yeah, but yeah. There are universals in these stories, absolutely. And you know, when I was doing work in Namibia as well, because I was looking at how former German space was transformed, and then started wondering of how then something of German origins, also like strongly colonial origins, but in the African continent, what happens there. And I learned that German colonists used a lot of very similar strategies of dispossession, disappropriation from Nama people, from Ovaherero people in Namibia. And the parallels were so striking that I started talking about them with activist groups in Namibia. So the conversations were fantastic. But yeah, it's kind of what is bridges between the contexts that you would not necessarily put together. So, thanks.
I also just wanted to say thank you. I found your talk super interesting, and you touched in your lecture about on gentrification, and also just now about like urban renewal and kind of corporations coming in. It just reminded me of I'm from London originally, and a few years ago there was a big campaign on the South Bank in London, because there's a skate park there that's been, I don't know how long it's been there, but it's been there for decades, and it's such a popular place for young people to go, especially young working class people, people who come from slightly poorer backgrounds, who maybe can't afford to go to, like, you know, can't afford to do after school clubs and things like that, and that's a big like part of their social life. And a few years ago they wanted to kind of bring in a lot of new shops and turn it into a kind of shopping area. I mean, there are already lots of shops and restaurants on the South Bank, so it was kind of like, do we really need more of this? And it was really moving, because you would walk down the South Bank, and there would always be everyday like campaigners asking you to sign petitions, selling badges and things like that to raise money to kind of stop this process of gentrification. And it actually worked, and the skate park is still there and it's still thriving. And I just find it very moving how important physical spaces can be, especially outside urban spaces, can be for people of different class backgrounds, particularly people that can't necessarily find as much safety or happiness in their domestic spheres. Yeah, it's not really a question, but I just wanted to share. It's just something that I was thinking about while you were talking about gentrification and all of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm very happy to know that that the park was defended and it continues existing. But you know, let's borrow from Singapore. Let's start doing the Hungry Ghost Festival on our streets threatened by gentrification. Let's bring all the ghosts in. I mean, I saw people put kind of a Polaroid pictures along the sidewalk with the faces of kids who used to live there. Or rooms, family rooms that used to stand there, and they recreate like really very different portrait, very different demographics, a boring word, of a place. So, hungry ghosts, let's use it as a weapon. Thank you. I've been in Tbilisi for like half a day, I think now. So I unfortunately didn't have chance yet to explore all the ghosts of this city. I'm sure that there are many. You guys are staying here, right? For like a semester or something like that? Yeah. Make it your research paper assignment. Where are the ghosts? Where do dragons live? I suspect I know where, but.
Anyone else wants to share something? Maybe yeah.
There is one hand.
So, I just had one question. I'll try and make it quick. You spoke a lot about kind of the way that spaces can change and the way the memories that are stored kind of in spaces change and things that can, the way that destruction can kind of create something and creation can sometimes destroy something and meanings change. And you also talked about, when you were talking about vandalism, collective kind of remember or leaving a mark on a place. And I guess I just wanted to ask if you think that there are memories which are kind of, I guess if you think that there are memories which are more valuable than others, ones which ought to be maintained and ought to be kind of conserved, or if everything is kind of subject to that process of change and remarking.
Yeah, great question. It really is a great question. One of my proposals, like when I speak to architects and city planners, I encourage them to take it easy and kind of accept the fact that things will be dirtied, destroyed, adjusted, walked over, and places will be contested. So build for contestation. Don't build against the contestation. That's a manifesto. They say, how do we do that? And say, like, guys, you're professionals. You go and figure out now how to do it. So what I'm saying is that as a group, as a society, especially as more and more kind of multicultural society that we are becoming, let's start imagining physical spaces as more fluid and flexible, and really go beyond the material, like kind of the naive materialism in which we still exist. But that's not an answer to your question about the value of given memory, because it's essentially a question about value of a given identity and given people. That's what it boils down to. Now, I do believe that power and anything near it filters out a lot of history. And since this process is happening, our task as civil society, as activists, as opposition, as whatever you identify yourself, critical thinkers, people, because I don't think you would come here if you were not critical. The task is then resist this filtering process, or kind of catch these cancelled lives and reinsert them back, because their value is not in what these lives are about, but in the very fact that they've been cancelled. Okay? If it makes sense, right? And the third thing is we really need an agonistic public sphere. And agonistic is not antagonistic, but agonistic is where we can disagree productively, where from conflict, from fight, from difference in position and difference in opinion, through a deep democratic process, we can actually reach a new transformative moment, a new place from which we can speak of value. And perhaps the value of people and identities and histories will change in that process necessarily. So, complicated question, unsatisfactory answer, but that's what I can offer now.
So if nobody has a question, I would like to ask one, connected to your previous answer. You mentioned contested memories and this kind of creating the space of conversation and re-evaluating of them on a civil society level, right? But it happens quite often, I think, when the state kind of appropriates all the spaces for preserving memories or creating narratives, right? We see a lot of that happening. What might be the tools of civil society or activists that might be constructive and productive and not creating the battlefield all over again?
Mm-hmm. That's a 1 million question. I'm going to take it and turn it around and ask you guys, what do you think? In the increasing closing down of spaces and places and arenas in which critical discourse and resistance can be launched by regimes, by states, by power, what can be done? I have some ideas, but maybe you have better ideas.
I'm not experienced with this, so this might be an uneducated answer, but I guess the core of it would be to preserve the spaces that hold those memories, figure out which spaces hold memories which are of value, which ought to be conserved. You need to know those spaces very personally, which effectively means you have to live near them or around them, and to have those memories and be a member of that community, the identity of which is seeking to be preserved. And so what that means is, Polina was talking about the states as kind of requisitioned and taking control of these areas, the culture of which ought to be preserved. And so the solution, I guess, I would think of would be that the places in which people live ought to be governed by the people that live in them, democratically in some way. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I don't know, that would make sense to me. It's one answer to a question with a million answers, so I'm not quite sure, but yeah.
Thank you. Anywhere, anything? I'm a big believer in a global digital sphere, and that it does provide us with outlets and pockets where control and suppression is, not quite there. I know a number of projects that mushroomed since February of this year, which collect testimonials, publish visuals, provide analysis and assessments. And I'm not talking about Telegram channels. I'm talking about online archives and depositories that underwent very strict fact-checking, were analyzed by researchers and assessments provided. I think this is incredibly important work. It's also, to me, it's also a question of a personal acceptance of risk and how much we are willing to sacrifice and in what timeline, right? The arrests, detentions, and convictions. I'm speaking from a place of privilege, and I understand that I am not to teach on how much personal risk one should take. But I also know that that's exactly what at heart of the issue, of the question. And finally, I do believe in using other people to become voices, to channel ideas, other people out there whom we can delegate to stake our stakes, to voice our ideas, to voice our opposition. So collaboration, which may require staying in the shadow, remaining unknown, nameless, but getting information out there and doing it. And again, there are projects like that right now.
I have one more question. Again, very much connected to preserving memories. This topic is very much present in the Baltic states, for example, especially nowadays, because the dissolving of the monument dedicated to the Soviet fighter or / Soviet occupier is happening basically today, from yesterday, I think. And there is a huge discussion in Latvia, in any language community, in any community there, over the fact if the Museum of Occupation holds this responsibility for preserving this piece of memory, a very much triggering one for everyone, or they can freely refuse to do so, which what they did basically. So the Museum of Occupation decided that they don't need even a piece of this monument, so they want to kind of erase this piece on the basis, as they said, that it doesn't hold any historical value. So how to approach, and the whole society is struggling to approach this. I'm not saying of Russian-speaking community of Latvia, but the whole society is very much confused, because the memory of occupation is a big part of Latvian memory. But the governmental body, the institution preserving the memory and public history, is just taking some decisions. So what would be the approach from your point of view, maybe, toward this? How do you see it based on your experience in so many countries, so many places?
I really don't like the position of an expert who stands outside the community and offers a solution, right? I do believe that things have to come from the society, from the locality. There needs to be a deliberate process. This I'm saying not as an expert on Baltic situation, Baltic country, on memorials, but more as a sociologist with some understanding of how dynamics of collective history and memory work. Yeah. So I can only suggest that they do bring a good team of social scientists who can understand, who would not simply count votes for removal or preservation, but also will understand from where these voices come from, how much money each voice has in the bank. That is, elites' voices are usually much more heard than marginalized people's voices, and that's the work of inclusion that needs to be done there. That said, there are also situations, and Latvia may be one of those, where there needs to be a strong political will, which simply says, this is not acceptable. We are removing this because it is associated with genocide, because it is associated with repression of such a scale that the existence alone already threatens the livelihood of a community. And that's again something that needs to be done in the context, and I will not be in the position to come and teach how to do things, but rather give some examples, the way we talked here tonight.
Yeah, thank you. So my question was exactly not on the giving or providing the ready-made answers that nobody was asking you and me or our audience, but mostly on like what framework might be used and Like, what
Yeah,
what
yeah.
what might be entry points to the situation from inside of the community?
Maybe just one thing I would add to this, because you know, I do believe in giving a voice, and I think it's a very important act, and it's a very important right that the community should have. That said, I also am advocating a careful approach to what is the social basis of this voice? Who is speaking? Also, is the voice always possible? Is it always possible to have the voice? And here I'm coming again from my experience of working in Africa, where there is simply no written archive. There are no recorded deaths, or there are very incomplete archives where victims are undercounted very often. And that lack of knowledge, lack of archive makes it very difficult to give a voice to a particular group of people, simply because they don't exist or they don't have a basis. So when we give a voice, we need to pay very much the attention of is the voice itself possible? Are we putting an extra burden on people who are so disadvantaged already that when we ask them to speak, they are confronted with the fact of absence, of impossibility to create a record? Right? Like, think about transatlantic slavery. What happens if we ask slaves, former slaves, to speak in the absence of records? So a voice is a very tricky thing, and we need to approach it very, very carefully and understand the politics of voicing very, very well.
Thank you. So, somebody else, maybe. Yes.
Thanks once again. It was really interesting. And I'm sorry to ask the question so late, but I'm just really interested in the answer. I started thinking about this when you were talking about disrupting a body's movement through a city and how this can move things, I guess the more unnerving aspects of the city, the histories of the city, from the realm of prosaic into something that you're noticing more. And I was also thinking about it when you were moving from kind of the micro area of urban space into domestic space and homes. And on an even smaller scale, of course, there's bodies, and our bodies are also completely constituted by our relationship with imperialism, our ancestors' relationship with imperialism, the way we interact with objects, the way we speak, the way our bodies look, and the way we feel in them. And I was wondering what you thought about this relationship and whether the kind of same theory of space applies with bodies as well.
Whew. Yeah. I'm going to disappoint you because you're touching upon an extremely interesting issue and something that I personally am just beginning to research myself, so I am not quite prepared, to speak with certainty. I want to say, let's see each other in a year from now, and then we can explore again where ancestors, but also the way they're gendered, right? Structure and organize our relationship with the material world. So, my apology. I'm going to write down a note for me and then come back with an answer.
So if there are no more questions or desire to share something, probably let's wrap it up.
on this point of like mutual encouragement to learn more and to continue this constant process. Yeah, thank you very much, Olga.
Thank you guys all.
And I want to remind you that you're very welcome to leave some donations around the corner for the evacuation project called Helping to Live. You can find all the links to the website and to the donation button on our social media. And we're gonna see you here next Friday at 7 p.m. Follow us, like us, and yeah, let's meet soon. Thank you.